What's going on, everybody? In this video I want to talk about peer assessments. A peer assessment is a type of assessment that we're going to use in our course that has you completing some sort of problem, turning it in via Blackboard, and then revisiting it after the submission deadline to evaluate two or three of your peers' work. Now, in general, peer assessments are great. There's a lot of research that shows that in general, peer assessments lead to a deeper level of understanding of the material. Okay? Now, admittedly, I don't use peer assessments in my other courses, but I do use it in programming. I think it's very important in specifically to programming. And this is why. In the wild, meaning like in the real world, if you're coding something, you're almost certainly coding just a little piece of a larger puzzle, a bigger chunk. And so when you write a program, you are going to almost always be handing your program off to somebody else who has to design a code around it or on top of your code. So that person has to be able to interpret your code or evaluate your code. Even imagine you're the person who receives code from somebody. You have to decipher, like, what is this that I'm looking at, okay? So this peer evaluation is very important to the practice of programming. And so there are a few good practices that you need to follow when you write a program. Now, behind me, I want to talk about some of these good practices. Behind me, you'll see this program that I've written, and depending on your experience in Python, you may or may not understand this program. That's okay. You don't have to understand the program. I want to point out a few things about it though. This hashtag or the pound sign is a comment operator, and everything after it gets ignored by the computer. So it's grayed out, you'll see. And the comments are for us humans then, because the computer ignores it. So these comments are important then to put in your code because it helps the human figure out what the code is doing. You'll always have, you should always have, your name and the date at top. All right. Now we're going to keep these peer evaluations anonymous, and so what I ask is that you put author at top or name at top, and then maybe you leave it blank. Maybe you get creative, Steve Jobs or something. But you don't need to put your name, right? You can just put a space though for it to show me that and to show your peers that you considered putting your name up there. You should put the date though, so make sure you put the date, and then put some comments at critical points in your code. All right, so you'll see other comments here at other critical points along the way. All right, and again, that helps decipher the code for the person who's evaluating it. Now you'll also notice that I've blocked off my code nicely. You'll see that, well, I've indented. We'll talk about it, indentation. But you'll see that I leave some white space. That is, I group common lines or lines that work together. I group them together to show that they're working together. So like this particular program computes a quotient and a remainder, and so here's where that is done. And so I group those two together, and then I leave some white space, and then I print the results, then I leave some white space, and then I handle the case where there's a zero division, right? And then put some white space, and then give my function calls. So all those blocks, you can see blocks. Like, you don't even need to understand this code, but you can just visualize the blocks there, and the blocks are all working together, and that white space helps decipher this thing. Also, I want to point out that I've used descriptive names for my variables and for my functions. It turns out you can choose. There are some rules that you have to follow, but in general you can choose the names of your variables and your functions, and so you'll see that I've used descriptive names, like I've called this function my division. That's because it computes the division. I've called this variable dividend and this variable divisor, right? Those have particular meanings in math. Quotient, remainder are some other variable names that I've used. So you want to keep all of these things in mind when you write your program. All right. Now, so you're going to submit your work, and there's a submission deadline, right? So you need to make sure that your submission gets in on time. If it doesn't, then you cannot participate in the peer evaluation. So you submit your work on time, and then after the deadline, you revisit that assignment, and some some of your peers' work now appears, right? And so you're to evaluate your peers' work. So you click on one of your peers' work, and I'm going to put another video up that shows some screenshots of how this is done. But basically, you get then a program or whatever, a file from your classmate, and you need to evaluate it. And I put the criteria there. I put, criteria one or criterion one. Does it do, this? And usually it does not require any interpretation. Like, does it have this? Yes or no? And if it does, then it's 1 point or 2 points. I say in the prompt, like, this is 2 points or 0 points, or this is 1 point or 0 points. If it has it, it's 2. If it doesn't, it's 0. Or if it has it, it's 1. Or if it doesn't, it's 0. Okay? Usually they don't involve any sort of interpretation. Sometimes the criterion will require a little bit of interpretation. Like, you have to really look at it. All right, and so you give each criterion a score: 1, 1, 1, maybe 0, 1, 1, and then Blackboard will handle everything else. Okay, and what I'm looking for, though, and this is not completely automated by any sense, like on my part, I watch all these evaluations going on, and what I'm looking for is that you give an honest assessment of your peers' work, right? And in particular, I'm looking for lazy or unfair grading. Lazy grading would be like, oh, I don't want to evaluate this thing. I'm just going to give it all high marks. Bam, 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 for the criteria, right? So maybe one of the questions is like, does this actually compute the quotient correctly, right? And you say that it does. So you give it, for that criterion, you give it a 1 instead of a 0. And then it turns out, though, it doesn't, right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at your evaluations, and if if you said that it computes it correctly and it doesn't, then you are going to lose points. Like, I'm going to go into Blackboard manually and adjust your score, say, no, 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 you did not evaluate this correctly. Like, you were wrong here. So I'm looking for lazy grading, like bam, 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 bam. Wipe your hands clean, don't have to think about it. No, you do have to think about it. Evaluate it, give it an honest assessment. Also, I'm looking for unfair grading. Like, you said it. Now this is the opposite case. You said it does not do this. It does not compute the quotient correctly, and it actually does. All right. In that case, you still were not accurate in your assessment. So if I see a bunch of zeros assigned, or it doesn't have to be a bunch, actually. It just, you said it did not do this, but it does. Then I'm going to penalize you for that. I'm going to manually go into Blackboard and adjust your score, and I will probably boost up the person's score who you evaluated, because it was correct when you said it was not. Okay, so these are just some things to keep in mind. I'm going to post another video that shows what Blackboard looks like to you when you are going to be doing this peer assessment. Thank you.